Yes.
How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
That's all of our discretionary spending, by the way. The entirety of our discretionary budget. So when they talk about the budget, that's all of it. He just said we were going to make it zero, but okay.
Yeah!
Yes.
$2 trillion.
When Elon Musk bought Twitter in 2022, he immediately slashed costs, getting rid of anything he saw as wasteful or unnecessary, famously posting a photo of himself getting rid of the plumbing fixtures on his first day in the office. Now he's been appointed by Donald Trump to cut spending and improve efficiency.
What is a discretionary budget? It's all the things that we talk about when we talk about the budget. And then there's things called non-discretionary, which is stuff that the United States has to pay. We are like promised to pay. So if you talk about like, usually when they talk about making the budget every year, or it's yearly, right? Quarterly? Yearly? I think it's yearly. When they talk about the budget, they're talking about our discretionary spending. So for instance, when people say like, oh, the military budget is half of our spending or whatever, they mean half of our discretionary spending. Because you see it's 18% of our total spending. Mandatory spending, also known as direct spending, is mandated by existing laws. Direct spending includes funding for entitlement programs like Medicare and Social Security and other payments to people, businesses, and state and local governments. For example, the Social Security Act requires the government to provide payments to beneficiaries based on the amount of money they've earned and other factors. And then discretionary spending is money formally approved by Congress and the president during the appropriations process each year. Generally, Congress allocates over half of the discretionary budget towards national defense, and the rest to fund the administration of other agencies and programs.
Efficiency for the US government. Musk, along with pharma entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, has been put in charge of what is being described as a new...
Is it possible they'll look to cut non-discretionary spending? You can't cut. It's called non-discretionary. You have no discretion over it. So you can't cut non-discretionary spending. It's promised already. You'd have to start breaking laws or violating agreements to do it.
Musk, along with pharma entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, has been put in charge of what is being described as a new government department, which is supposed to work with government employees to reduce spending and unnecessary regulation.
I think the funniest name is Doge, the Doge, Department of Government Efficiency.
The Department of Government Efficiency.
Congressional Budget Office. Okay, this is a cute chart. So you can see of our $6.1 trillion right here, the discretionary budget is 1.7 trillion. The mandatory spending is 3.8, and then 700 billion is interest. So when so when Elon Musk says we're going to cut $2 trillion from the budget, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. So what's in non-discretionary spending? I think the biggest chunks are things like Social Security and Medicare. I think those are your biggest chunks. Where's our non-discretionary spending? Of your 3.8 trillion, 1.56 trillion is going to Medicare and Medicaid, and then 1.3 trillion is going to Social Security. So here's this is like 2.9 trillion right here, which is the majority of your non-discretionary spending. And then other things you've got are income security programs, federal civilian and military retirement benefits, certain veterans programs, and then 383 billion for other programs, deposit insurance, pension benefit, guaranteed, veterans income security. Oh, no, wait, that's for the veterans programs, but stuff like that, yeah. But why would you assume they wouldn't break laws? Because it would destroy the confidence in the United States' crediting. No one would ever lend or borrow, no one would lend to the U.S. It would just be, it would be disastrous. It would be a catastrophe. That's only federal spending, right? Yes, when you're talking about the budget and all that, it's federal, yeah.
Efficiency, whose joke name Doge is a nod to a Musk-endorsed cryptocurrency, is not a real government department, as only Congress can establish new government departments.
Correct.
Or agencies. So Doge is probably better thought of as a think tank that does analysis which is then pitched to the government.
Correct.
The government can then decide whether to follow their recommendations or not. While Doge may not have any legal authority, at least today, Elon Musk does have the ear of the incoming president after his super PAC spent an estimated $200 million on campaigning for Trump, with Musk turning up in person at multiple campaign events. Most importantly, Trump appears to be taking Musk's pledge to cut costs seriously, having referred to Doge as the Manhattan Project of our time, a reference to the project to develop an atomic bomb during the Second World War. Now, rooting out fraud, reducing government waste, and increasing efficiency is something that should appeal to all sides of the political spectrum. If you're a believer in small government, the appeal is fairly obvious. But socialists would also want to see government waste and fraud being eliminated, as lower waste would mean more effective government programs where the spending is more efficiently reaching the people it's intended for. For years, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has been warning that US national debt is on an unsustainable trajectory. And I think it's fair to say that there's a consensus that too much debt is a terrible idea, especially if the country's growth doesn't deliver.
Aren't they planning to cut the $2 trillion by mass firing federal employees? Since federal wages are part of the mandatory budget, what's stopping them from trying that? It just doesn't, there's just not enough money to cut there. People anytime somebody's going to go line by line through the go to do things, you're talking about like from $1 trillion, you'll save like a couple billion maybe. Like nobody, but the problem is nobody really has any concept of like all the numbers. Nobody really has like any concept of when you're talking about these levels of dollars, nobody knows. Like if I tell you last year the United States government wasted $10 billion in money, like is that a lot? I don't know, 10 billion seems like a lot of money, $10 billion. But like, what is that compared to 1 trillion or 10 trillion or 5 trillion or 100 billion? Like it's these are hard numbers to conceptualize. So they'll throw around big numbers, but like, is it really helping if we were to go through and cut this? Like what programs would even be funded? Like it's just, yeah.
Elon Musk posted a call for CVs on Twitter last week, saying that he doesn't need ideas, he needs super high IQ, small government revolutionaries willing to work 80 plus hours per week on unglamorous cost cutting. There were, of course, thousands of replies, including one from Razzle Khan, who's widely considered one of the greatest and most influential rappers of all time, saying that she would like to share some actionable solutions to curtail fraud and cybercrime. Unfortunately, she's unlikely to be able to take up a role within Doge, as she's currently serving time for fraud and cybercrime. A few people have, of course, pointed out the irony of starting a new government department to deal with waste when one already exists. The Government Accountability Office exists to determine whether federal funds are being spent efficiently and effectively. It's there to investigate allegations of illegal or improper activities and to report on how well government programs and policies are meeting their objectives. So basically the same thing as Doge, but without the silly name. It has additionally been pointed out that the new department having 2 heads is possibly wasteful too. Now, this is not the first time that a president has formed a task force to improve government efficiency and cut spending. In 1905, Theodore Roosevelt's Committee on Department Methods, which was known as the Keep Commission, I think that was some sort of meme coin at the time, was given a similar task of investigating salaries, purchasing, accounting, and so on to reform the administration of the executive branch. In 1984, Ronald Reagan formed the Grace Commission, headed by the industrialist J. Peter Grace, to eliminate waste and inefficiency in the federal government. Grace instructed his employees to leave no stone unturned in their search to root out inefficiency. When submitted, the report said that 1/3 of all income taxes are consumed by waste and inefficiency in the federal government, and it warned that if its recommendations were ignored, that national debt could hit $13 trillion by the year 2000. In 1996, Bill Clinton announced in his State of the Union address that the era of big government was over and promised to put welfare recipients to work. So will Elon Musk be able to quickly slash $2 trillion of government spending like he promised? Can he do what he did at Twitter and just fire 80% of government workers? Well, it might not be quite that easy. Only 8% of US government spending goes on employee compensation, and that's in fact amongst the lowest percentage in the developed world. So where does all of the money go then? Well, most of the money in the federal budget is spent on Social Security at almost $1.5 trillion. Then interest on the national debt at almost $900 billion. There's Medicare at $874 billion, unemployment benefit and food stamps at $448 billion, veterans benefits at $325 billion, and federal employee pensions at $197 billion. I'm not sure that Musk could cut much of that spending, as Trump has vowed publicly not to touch any of these programs. He even campaigned on making Social Security more generous by removing the income tax on it. This spending is all classified as mandatory spending anyhow, meaning that these payments are required by existing laws, so they would be very difficult to cut. Mandatory spending sums up to $4.4 trillion, or 65% of all federal spending. That leaves $2.3 trillion of spending, most of which would need to be cut to zero in order to hit Musk's $2 trillion target.
Yep.
There's no reason to believe he just made up that number on the spot either, as if he was making up numbers, it would have been $420 trillion.
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Yes.
$2 trillion.
Discretionary spending is not...
It's just like, it's like, but like by or read. Like it was a question that one asked to another reader, and he gave an answer that, and then all the readers started clapping, like, oh, 2 trillion, oh, like.
Billion.
Yeah!
Yes.
$2 trillion.
Discretionary spending is not permanently enshrined in law and instead has to be voted on every year by US lawmakers. This part of the budget includes defense at $874 billion, transportation at $137 billion, and education, training, employment, and social services, which combined come to a bit over $300 billion. While cutting all of these departments might hit Musk's $2 trillion target, slashing these to zero could cause some problems. The Department of Transportation, amongst other things, builds, repairs and inspects roads and bridges, some of which are already crumbling. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, 230 million Americans regularly travel on structurally deficient roads and bridges. 15 to 20 million Americans drink water contaminated with lead, which the EPA is in charge of cleaning up. The Department of Energy, amongst other things, manages America's nuclear infrastructure, not just the power plants, but also the country's nuclear weapons arsenal and the safe storage of nuclear waste. While I'm sure efficiencies can be found in these departments and others, they'll be found by careful analysis. You can't just shut them down like the servers at the 13th most popular social network, where the worst possible outcome is that your website stops working until you plug the server back in again. People's lives and the prosperity of the country can be put at risk if cost cutting is done in a sloppy manner. Now, on the topic of defense, as that made up the biggest chunk of discretionary spending, in theory, Trump is an isolationist, or at least he was during his first term in office. But even then, there weren't many cuts in the defense budget, and he did create the Space Force at the cost of $738 billion. Additionally, Trump said when campaigning...
Over how long? That must be over 10 years or something, right? When President Trump signed a $738 billion defense spending bill on Friday... Oh, no. This bill was for all the money for the... Okay, sorry. That was for all the money allocated to defense.
At least he was during his first term in office. But even then, there weren't many cuts in the defense budget, and he did create the Space Force at the cost of $738 billion.
So the cost was part of the... It wasn't like the entirety of the entire budget went towards making the Space Force, right?
Additionally, Trump said when campaigning that he would build an Iron Dome missile defense shield around America, which would be difficult to do while slashing defense spending. The defense budget is around $800 billion, so we just have $1.5 trillion left, meaning that Musk would need to shut down hundreds of agencies, things like the Department of Education, the Department of Transportation, the Justice Department, Natural Resources and the Environment, and General Science, Space and Technology. I'll tell you right now that if it was me, I'd cut space spending right away, because I've heard that they've been paying a guy billions of dollars to launch rockets into the Indian Ocean that can barely carry a banana on board. It's 55 years since we sent a man to the moon, and this guy's wasting taxpayer money on catching rocket boosters, which I can't imagine was specified in the original government contract. He's talking about sending men to Mars when the technology to do this has existed for years. Not the technology to keep them alive once they get there, obviously, but he doesn't seem to be working on that. Oh wait, I just remembered who that guy is. Elon won't cut that spending, will he? Maybe Vivek can deal with that one. Since his appointment, Musk has mostly tweeted about individual incidents of wasteful spending, without any discussion as to how to tackle the biggest line items on the budget. One of the legitimate worries about Trump putting Musk in a government oversight role like this is that he might be setting the fox amongst the chickens. According to the New York Times, Musk's companies were promised $3 billion across nearly 100 different government contracts last year alone, facing 17 different federal agencies. According to The Economist, 10% of Musk's personal fortune is derived from contracts and freebies from the US government. His new role and his political connections could allow him to meddle with regulations, tariffs, and procurement programs, advantaging his companies and harming his competitors.
Like, I hate... It sounds so stupid to, like, even say anything. It feels dumb, and this is why it's not satisfying when I said, like, God, I wish these things would happen to conservatives. So we could show them how hypocritical they are. But, like, the idea that you would put a current billionaire... No, I'm sorry. My bad. Elon Musk is not just a billionaire. The richest man in the world... a guy whose businesses thrive off of government contracts, in charge of determining where the government should spend its money in any capacity. Like, that is such an obvious, outwardly corrupt, horrible... I'll be more generous, I guess, or I'll be super charitable. Instead of calling it corrupt, at the very least, we say there's a massive, obvious conflict of interest. Like, why would you ever think this is a good idea? Like, it's such an obviously, insanely crazy conflict of interest. How could, like, this is like oligarchical, literally. It's just like insane.
Musk has a significant portion of his wealth tied up in China, where half of his cars are built at his most profitable, if not only profitable factory. This makes him an obvious target for manipulation by the Chinese government, who could bankrupt him by shutting down his Shanghai factory. This is cause for concern with him being a military contractor. He could be coerced into cutting internet access in a war zone, and is extremely worrying were he to have greater government access, which it looks like he will have. Many have questioned if Musk should have any US government security clearance at all, as the conflicts of interest are obvious and extreme, and this was before he gained political access. So can we expect Doge to be successful? Well, both Trump and Musk do want to disrupt the federal government, and Trump does have a mandate to do so, having won not just the election but the popular vote too. With ever-growing government spending, a budget deficit of 6% of GDP, and growing national debt, some sort of reform is definitely needed. There are already over 90,000 pages of federal regulations in place, and several thousand new rules are issued by federal agencies each year. Each new regulation, as I mentioned earlier, usually requires a budget so that it can be enforced and monitored. And for this reason, government budgets grow and grow.
Here, this is like the #1 way to cut through the bull on this. When somebody says, I think I tweeted this out earlier on the vaccine thing. When somebody says we give our kids way too many vaccines, okay, or we just spend way too much money, we need to do budget cuts. Then you say, okay, that's fair. Which vaccines would you cut? There's no answer ever. Oh, you want to cut government spending? Okay, cool. What departments would you cut from? What programs are you going to cut? How much money are you going to save? What are you looking to cut? Like when you just give this as a blanket, like whatever thing, it's so stupid and it's so meaningless. And it's so it's such an empty platitude. Like just give me one example of a vaccine that you think we don't need, or one example of a government expenditure that you think is not necessary. Because when they started giving government expenditures, was it Lankford that was doing it? These expenditures were like $60,000. Was this what we watched?
Then debt payer dollars. A butterfly I just did open the metropolitan climate change the border. Do about it. The taxpayers in Oklahoma had to pay for that wine, highest income areas in the entire world. The good folks of Oklahoma helped pay for a wine pedestrian trail.
Like this Ghana study, these studies on like helmets and shit, right? The waste here was, or he says it's waste, but also that's true too. They're not even like talking about government waste also, which is concerning because I thought it was waste we're getting rid of. They're talking about getting rid of government programs, like things that they're actually funding. But then it's like the waste here is $268,000. Like, let's assume that our budget is $1 trillion, right? 1 trillion. Let me try to make this like into numbers that like make sense. That's $1 billion. So we're talking about $1 trillion, and we want to cut $300,000 in spending. So if we get rid of the last 5,000, that would be like looking at, let's just go all the way down to, this would be like, did I do this conversion right? This would be like saving $3 out of $10 million. Did I miss a cut here? Like, this is the type of savings that we're talking about. What is the... Stupid.
I appreciate that, Destiny.
All right, bye.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.